I've just been chatting away, not even realizing that I haven't even added myself into the stream. Right. So, what was I saying? Um, Welcome, D-Man. Welcome, Silver Bullet. Thank you for being here on time. Hope people brought a notepad with them. Today is going to be quite classroom-like. A lot of information I got for you. I've been preparing a sort of script to cover this topic, and there's already other streams planned that are kind of similar, that are in conjunction. So there's a lot of stuff to go through, and I might divide this particular script into 2 streams because it's 4 pages, and I think it's just going to be a bit too much. So we'll cover what we can, and we'll get some tunes going. Took me a while to find a song because there's a lot of Christmas songs on the audio library, but there was one here that caught my attention. It's called Robots and Aliens, and that's a bit of a joke I have with someone. So I hope they appreciate it. I don't really like the song, but it's a bit weird, so apologies for that. Oh. Jesus, I'm just gonna cut that song off, man. That's just too much. Shadrach is here. Good evening, sir. Yeah, so apologies for that. Let's boot that thing off out of here. Be gone, evil one. All right. Shall I share a picture? Does anyone really care? It's always a palaver. Maybe I can be a bit quicker. Right. Instead of listening to anything I've got to say, I'm sure a lot of you will be trying to work out the maze. So, right, it's becoming evident, and we're delving into the Myers-Briggs more and more. Some of you aren't particularly interested in it, maybe, or some of you might be. It is a confusing area of research, however you want to describe it. Lots of misconceptions and mistyping, and so it's like if you're gonna delve into it, you really do need to sort of deep dive. There's no like glossing over it. You'll just make errors and get the wrong idea. Namely, things like this isn't your identity is a foremost, and the letters really don't actually mean anything. So all the letters is telling you your function stack. So I'm going to have to now explain a little bit about your function stack. You might have heard things like the 4 corners of your mind. So the Myers-Briggs, the way it's formulated is how we perceive or receive data and informations from our surroundings. So how we get info, data, how we process that, then how we come to a decision, and then how we enact it out into reality. So it's a chain of command, a mode of operations in mathematical terminology. And all these letters and things, this will be called typology. So we can type people based on how they go through their processes, their functions, and it can be very interesting and insightful. So I've used the INFJ as a case study example here. And in the title it says malfunctions, and really that's a bit of tongue-in-cheek. They're not really, yes, they're sort of, these functions are problematic. They cause chaos when they're malfunctioning, but they're not really malfunctioning. They are working how they should be working. It's that they're not calibrated and adjusted, and there isn't an awareness of what's happening. So there's no executive control. They're just running rampant, and causing havoc and mayhem and problems for the individual. So in a sort of sense, you could say that the individual is malfunctioning, but it's not because of their functions. It's that they're not calibrated and working in synchronicity or harmony with one another. These functions, these four functions, are in the realms of well, you have perceiving functions, so your intuition, those who like to call themselves intuitive, probably aren't using that description in the sense that the Myers-Briggs talks about it. Your intuition is for observations of patterns. It can and quite often looks at the future, and it runs simulations, and can handle concepts. Systems are another kind of key trait. So a system analysis would be using a lot of intuition to know how the components fit together. And a lot of these functions are on how they describe like a coin. So the other side of this coin, of this perceiving coin, if you've got intuition on one side, will be sensory. And normally it's associated with physical sensories like smells, sights, sounds, touch. But there is also this element of like hard facts. So someone who's very statistics, factual, they're very good with their history, figures, accountants, probably is using or leaning into more their sensory function. So you've got intuition, you've got sensory, and then you've got feeling and thinking, so emotions and logic. And those are also, they mean more than the Oxford Dictionary definition of them. When we say feelings, we're actually talking about your value and what matters to you. It's not just like, oh, angry, sad, and whatever, or happy and lonely or whatever. It's actually where you put your value, and your thinking is your rationalizing, like your reasons for doing such a thing. Now these coins, I've just described two coins here. One is a perceiving, and a feeling and thinking is a deciding coin. They kind of go hand in hand. So really, someone who says they're logical still is using feeling in conjunction with their logic. It's one thing to have reasons, but if you don't have any values for those reasons, then why would you do anything? And likewise, it works the other way around. If you've got values, but you don't do any reasoning to go with it, then you're not going to act upon it. And just as a kind of FYI, people like to talk about their morals and ethics and their principles and their values. Those are values. So that's in the realm of your feelings. Yes, people like to harp on about control your biology, control your emotions, and there you go. They're talking about feelings when they bring up these morals or ethics and principles. You might try and now use your logic side, be like, no, Billy, we're being logical here with these ethics and morals, and it's like, no, you're using a value system, so that's feelings. Okay, let me see. I've already discussed the tongue-in-cheek of the word malfunction. So really, they're not malfunction. A more appropriate word here would be something like underdeveloped functions. If your functions haven't been developed, you've got no awareness of them. If this is all brand new to you, then your function, your control of utilizing these functions in harmony with one another, that's like taking it to the next level, will be kind of instinctually based, sort of like automatic. And this is where the Myers-Briggs sort of helps to explain why you might do quirky things and you're not too sure what's the reasoning behind it. Well, it kind of covers. Rusty's here. Good evening, sir. Good to see you here. Hope everyone's brought their notepads. Another reminder. You can always play it back. So this function stack, how you arrange these functions, creates a hierarchy. And I'm going to use the INFJ in particular because their arrangement of the functions sets them up for major heartache and a very difficult task at recalibrating them. Other types, like ESTPs or INSJ or something like that, they'll have every type will have problems somewhere. There'll be blind spots, pros and cons. There is no best numero type. They all are equally balanced and have merits for their own worth or whatever. But for the INFJ, the way their arrangement is very troublesome for that type of person, and we'll explain why. I'm trying not to overload. I'm trying to be a bit considerate where people are in their understanding. Now, another way of looking at this, they do like to use a lot of analogies, is in the top, they'll talk about this stack as slots. So in the top slot, your first primary function, your dominant function, the big cheese. This can be called sometimes like the boss. And that is like very energized. It's the main one. So it's the head honcho. And can be in the background without you particularly noticing. So as a kind of relatable way of visualizing it, imagine you're on your computer or you're on your phone. You don't really think while you're on StreamYard or on YouTube that, Windows or whatever the operating system is running. You know it's there, but you kind of set it aside. You don't really focus on what operating system you're using while you're using your computer. You might do now and again. And obviously the operating system really is the sort of the chief of command when it comes to whatever device you're on. So in the number 2 slot is the parent slot. And this is the one where most people will kind of identify with and feel it and sense it in action and in operation. So that would be the equivalent of being on YouTube or something like that. In number 3 is the child, or sometimes is it the child? No, sometimes they call it the aunt, or I think they call it the aunt. It's the tertiary function. The second one is also called the auxiliary function. The third one is a tertiary function. And the fourth one is the inferior, the least developed of them all. of the top 4 anyway. There are 8. And that's like the baby of the group. It has a small voice, and the ones above in this chain of command usually kind of, well, they very often, override the subordinates underneath. So hence the inferior title. It has little say, little impact. It still contributes. It's still a team player, but it's not going to be making all the big decisions. So these 4 cognitive, the top 4, will be what will be deemed as your ego. This is your sense of overall sense of self, your ego, and this is who you like to think you are. So we would say this is ego syntonic. Now, the next 4, so 5, 6, 7, 8, this is the shadow side. This is who you try not to associate or pretend is who you are, but it is, unfortunately. You're a package. And that the shadow will be basically, so if the top 4 are ego syntonic, the shadow is ego dystonic. You don't really want to acknowledge or resonate or agree with it. To you, if you can get rid of it, you would, sort of thing. And that's another branches to another point. You can't rearrange your functions. You can't swap them out. You get what you get, and that's kind of like tough titties. You're gonna have to deal with it. And just because you might, like for the INFJ, they pride themselves, they champion the parent. That's the second function, and for them that would be extroverted feeling. So they're a people's person, and they care about the community. They're very charitable, very generous, and all this sort of stuff. They want harmony. They're a people pleaser. They avoid conflict. They want social groups and all that sort of stuff. And you might think that, well, I'm more logical. So in your second position slot, you got TE, someone like the INTJ, for example. But that doesn't mean you don't possess TE or FE somewhere in your stack. It's just it's just been allocated in a different position. So with the INFJ, they're using FE. Well, where is TE? It will be in position 5, 6. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is intuition, feeling, thinking. It'll be in the 7th position. The trickster is what it's called. So they do have TE, just like the INTJ is, but it's in the ego dystonic section, in the shadow, in the 7th slot. And likewise for the INTJ, you might say to them, well, where's your FE? Mine's in the 2nd position. Where's yours? Same, vice versa, basically. Theirs is also, as it goes, like in the 7th slot, in the shadow, ego dystonic, and being 7. You see how far down the list of chain of command it is as well. So it's almost unnoticeable, but it's there. And that's how the differences are with these different types. You've got all the functions. Everyone has all the functions. It's how they're arranged, and complement really each other and work together. And you might have noticed I said TE or FE, so extrovert. So you divide that into 2. So for every cognitive function, you'll have an introverted side and an extroverted side to it, just to make it more difficult for everyone to understand. And that's how they ultimately derive the 16 personality types. Now, there's arguments to say that there are actually subtypes that go off into like 512, and there's even been suggestion that they can divide it even further, and now you're looking at over 2,000 types, personality types. So it does get a bit convoluted and it's sort of silly after a while. But for the purposes of this conversation, we'll try and keep it simple. Free birds here. Good to see you. Do we have a question? When I see a chunk of writing, I think, ooh, okay. So we must be aware that there is. Let me show it on the screen so everyone else can see. We must be aware that there is a difference between a 20-year-old INFJ and a 60-year-old INFJ. As with all types, they grow wiser in time. Hopefully, yes. Well, we mentioned about development, and even if you've got two 20-year-old INFJs, they're not going to be the same. Very rarely will you find them. They're going to have to score pretty identical. And the weird, bizarre thing, you want to know what something that's very bizarre? If you get someone who is bang on, especially when you use the 512 spectrum, and you find two people who are matching up perfectly, they actually look like doppelgangers. They have the same kind of facial features and structures. It's sort of pseudoscience, but it's this kind of bizarre, uncanny sort of, no, there's something kind of going on here. But to reference Freebird's point here, yeah. So you can have two people who are both technically INFJs. They're both the same age. They come from the same sort of neighborhood and something like that, but they're very different, and that can be confusing because you'd be like, one of them is like Gandhi and the other one is like Hitler. How can they be so different? Well, it's because they're different people. Just because you're an INFJ doesn't. That's not who you are. That's not your identity. It doesn't factor in your preferences in there is an element of preference choosing how you lead with your functions, but I mean in terms of like your flavor, your quirks and like personalization of your personality, your experiences each of these individuals have lived through and accumulated their knowledge. One went to engineering school and the other one went into medical school, but they're both INFJs, they're both male or something, or both female, and they're both 20 years old. They're not the same person. So no one is exactly the same. This whole MBTI Myers-Briggs thing is basically just how your brain is. What kind of machine? It's what engine has been installed into your car. So some cars have the same kind of engine. Some are 4 cylinders, some are 16 valve, some are diesel or whatever. And in that respect, then this can be of use to some of you, or to those of you who are running into issues or want a better understanding. So whatever is going to be said here, you're going to have to take it as a basis and see where it tallies with instances in your personal life, and then you'll have those sort of epiphanies and eureka moments, and you'll have that understand, be like, now I understand why I did such and such when that happened. That behavior was coming from, or that line of logic or whatever, or why is it I keep daydreaming? I see, that's because of my intuition trying to predict the future, and it's living in the future and not in the present moment. No wonder I'm banging my toe on the furniture, because I'm not in this time period. I don't see it. Everyone else can walk around the object, but I thought I was just clumsy. It's like, no, you've got an inferior SE, and you're a klutz because of it. You're not observant of reality, because your NI is trying to make you escape reality in a way. So no wonder they go, I see. Okay, people just thought I was a doofus. Like, well, you're that too. You're a doofus, but there's reasons why you're a doofus. Yeah. In likelihood, I'm not saying it's for definite that these are the reasons why you do certain things, but it can help. Anyway, a little bit of rambling. Iridium's here. Good to see you, sir. Anyone solve the maze? Shout out if you solved the maze. All right, so let's start reading the script. This is all right. We're gonna go in now. All right, so NI tries to introverted intuition. This is looking into inwardly, not outwardly, to try and funnel concepts, systems, patterns into a singular entity, if possible, but at least into something kind of they can hold in their hands, directed inwardly, already known information in a way. So there's a bit of organization going on there. You're joining the dots. You're seeing a pattern. You're trying to understand the system. You're consolidating all of those things, and it's for the individual. The extroverted version would be more open-ended. So a good way of visualizing this is think of a tree. Extroverted intuition would be going up the tree and branching out, considering all of the many parallel universes and concepts and ideas, and not really making a final decision of what is going to happen. It's kind of open-ended. Whereas the other way, introverted, is going down the branches, back into the trunk, and more definite in its verdict. So for the INFJ, it leads with primary number 1 slot, the big head honcho, introverted intuition. And there you are thinking they were feely type of people. They're actually observers. Feely is in the 2nd slot. I'm going to sneeze. Hold on a second. Sorry, excuse me. So NI tries to predict the future, and it does this by basing it on the past and the patterns and the things it already knows. In order to have, so it does this in order to have control over the potential chaos that SC brings along. So SC is looked at sensory, external things out in the real world, which it can't really control, randomness. So this is chaos. NI doesn't like chaos. And this is one of the main reasons why it does what it does, is to try and keep chaos at bay. And so already there's an internal conflict between the 1st position and the 4th position. You've got intuition in charge, and the little inferior SE is like, hey, daydreamer, stop living in the future and fantasizing on all these concepts and possibilities and idealizations of utopia. Have a little reality check here. You haven't had a dinner all day or something like that. And that's SE keeping you grounded to reality. So it's actually doing you a favor. It's just an irritating favor for the INFJ. They don't like being reminded of reality. It's like, hey, you haven't paid your bills today. The bailiff is at the door. So this is chaos. And being inferior 4th position, sensory, extroverted, it gets overwhelmed because of reality. So usually for the INFJ, don't be surprised, it's a common kind of thing that social interactions, even despite being a social type of person, it's very draining for them because it's very chaotic. They can't control what happens, and they've got a lot of anxiety because of NI making them worry about the future. So social interactions, random things happening, they don't like surprises, for instance. It's very draining. And usually for the INFJ, they'll want to have a little me time, a bit of peace time, a bit of recharged battery time, and will tend to go off into why nature, because nature isn't so chaotic. So there you go. No wonder some people like having walks in nature and get away from the city. It's because, again, the SC is on the fritz from all this stimuli, and it's maybe in an inferior position, or maybe a little bit higher, or maybe even further down. It might not be the. So in contrast, for example, if he had extroverted sensing as the head honcho, that would be a party animal type of person who loves randomness, who loves surprises. So you can see how, depending where these functions are, you have a totally different type of person. So there's the relationship for the INJ as this case study anyway. So now with this NI, with where it's positioned, etc., and its role, its job, is able to make, to some degree, quite accurate predictions of the future. Mystics, fortune tellers, because it's got a lot of energy and charge. It's got a lot of power being in the first position. So it's had a lot of time to ruminate and map out all these potential problems that could come from this chaos from SE. So NI is doing a job of safeguarding and protecting it's trying to create a ideal future and safeguard that so that it will come to pass, so that it will happen, so they can feel more if they can make an accurate prediction and it actually turns out to be true, they feel more at ease because everything is going according to plan. And that's another character sort of thing. This type of person is quite organized and a bit of a planner. Not as much of a planner as someone who is more using thinking, but they're sort of like an INTJ, but they're both types are organized, both types are planners, both types are looking towards the future, but just in a very slight different kind of way. Now, even if when the IN function is looking into the future and it sees failure, it can at least still feel secure because it knew it was going to happen. It could see that there was going to be a problem. So it can lessen the blow. It's not a surprise if something fails because it's like, I knew that was going to happen. Now for the INFJ, if all this energy is going into safeguarding to protect the future, then it's looking out for hazards. You can see that it's kind of a little bit negative in its approach towards things, and if it's double dipping and making sure to be vigilant, then it's not really expecting success. So when success does happen, it kind of catches them off guard. It's sort of a mix of the anxiety of worrying about the future and a relief and a surprise that it worked out okay, because they were focusing on trying to safeguard. But NI on its own, without using any other functions, and this is the same for every type, if you don't use all your functions harmoniously together, is pretty much useless. It can't. Like if NI is running simulations over and over again, and there's nothing to sort of interrupt this from bring it to a conclusion, to enact it into real life, to have some sort of to break this running of simulations, then it's like a trap. They'll be too stuck in their head, and it's running this simulation over and over again because it's trying to organize and optimize so that the future is guaranteed, and that's already preposterous. But try as you might, that is what NI is trying to do. It's trying to guarantee the outcome so that it can have control over the chaos of that reality is trying to remind it of. So this type of person is already very anxious. You could say maybe fearful or defensive. There's a lot of, you could say maybe insecure to some extent and things like that. But when there's stability, there's a routine, there's a structure in place that helps to reassure them, because you can now make predictions, and the NI is doing its job as it should. So there can be a relief, there can be reassurance. So stability for a person like this, an INFJ, same with for an INTJ, and there'll be another two. Those two have NI first. There's another two that have NE as head honcho. Same sort of deal. Anyway. So stability will bring reassurance, and so hence there's this desire. So how do you get this stability and reassurance for these types of people? This is where their second function helps out. Being an extroverted function, either feeling or thinking, is looking for where this person fits in relationship to the tribe, to the external world. And it wants to know how other people either think or how they feel, so it can then know where they stand with everyone. And that's to funnel into a sense of knowing where you are, who you are, what's your purpose, what's your function being as part of society. And in turn, all of that becomes security, stability, and reassurance. All is well if this is going according to plan, and there is this feedback from the external, sort of like validating the second cognitive function and saying, yeah, everything's good. You're a team player. We all want you on board. You're a nice guy or girl, whatever. Everyone likes you, and we know where you know where you stand, and there's no mystery. Where am I in my notes? Now the thing is, so here's the caveat. But being a extroverted function, either feeling or thinking, this will mean, unfortunately, well, it depends how you want to kind of look at it, but the needs of the tribe, making the tribe happy, making people happy, takes more precedence than the individual's own need. So for the INFJ with feeling extroverted, second position, where is their introverted feeling of themselves? It's in the shadow, way down the list. So other people's feelings are more important to the INFJ than their own feelings, and in likelihood they won't even know how they feel. For the INTJ, other people's reasons are more important than their own, because they've got TE, so reasons of the tribe. And so in either case, the INFJ is looking for the emotional feedback from people, for value, because the feelings in this context of Myers-Briggs is where you get your values from. So that's the feedback information it's looking for from the external environment. It needs to understand people's feelings more than their own, because it needs that for calibration. For the INTJ, they need to understand people's reasons more than their own, but that's the feedback they're looking for. They're looking for confirmation of people's reasons So this is the role of the second slot, the parent slot, the auxiliary function. Now, if there is no feedback, this is where we get a problem. Let's say you decide to be a hermit or live on an island, or people don't respond or something, but there's no feedback, there's no exchange of this going on. Then we end up with a problem. This causes the individual to feel kind of lost. They got no reference, and that will add to an anxiety. This will make it difficult for both the INFJ and INTJ, because remember, the head honcho is the intuition is trying to predict and forecast. It can't make predictions and forecast if it's not getting feedback from other people. And then so additional anxiety, because now the NI is demanding. It's kind of a bit of a bossy boss type of character, but it needs that. It needs some sort of soothing going on. But so if you can't forecast, what does that mean? Now you're in jeopardy of chaos entering your life, and the NI will be saying that because that chaos will happen, I can see chaos happening because I can't predict and safeguard against the future. So now we're looking at how things go out of whack and out of control. So very important to stop this from happening, that there's feedback. Now, another way of looking at that, so in this chain of command of cognitive processing, we're missing out step 2. So you go from step 1, you miss out step 2, there's no feedback, and now you're landing on step 3. And if your future is reminding you to consider the past as a way of trying to get back on track, it brings past events and places them into the future. So you're and by placing it into the future, it's just a waiting game. You're waiting for what you think you know will happen, and you're essentially reliving trauma. Now for the INFJ, if you skip out stage 2, second slot, your feelings, you're in the NITI loop. We were discussing this before on a previous stream. Loops. So these are both introverted functions. There's no external feedback or juxtaposition to work in conjunction with. For this type of person, they are now living in a futuristic simulation of trauma combined with introverted thinking, and for them it's a maddening experience, and they end up with what you'd probably consider as analysis paralysis, just overthinking, catastrophizing, like doom is coming, I know it's going to happen, and they can't break this cycle. So what do? I don't know what to do because I got no feedback. So, but I know chaos is coming. What are we going to do? And around they go, paralyzed. For the INTJ, I'm using these two mainly as examples because I hear in the community a lot of people talking about INFJs and INTJs. So this will hopefully help those out. and maybe confirm whether or not you actually are typed correctly. They'll be stuck in the NIFI loop. So a different kind of beast, but instead of a analysis paralysis, it might be more of a decision paralysis for them. So instead of overthinking over and over for an INTJ, they will not be able to come to a decision. Now all types can have their loop. They can all skip out on stage 2 and be stuck with 1 and 3, and the problem manifests in different ways. So if you're trying to help someone, it's good to understand what function stack they've got, so that you can give them the right sort of medication, so to speak. You can give them the right sort of input, feedback that they require to help them out. If you've got an INFJ stuck with a NITI loop, and you're giving them additional thinking to ponder about, you're going to make that situation worse. What they need is FE to come back into the picture and get that calibration going, that feedback. So for them, for the INFJ, it's important to know how people feel or their value, and that will help guide them to then be able to make a decision. And vice versa for the INTJ. Like if they're stuck in a NIFI loop, then asking them how they feel is going to make it worse. They need to reintroduce the missing function, TE, and so they need to know what the tribe is thinking and their reasons for doing things, and that will help them to then be able to break that decision paralysis, and they can now make a decision. See how scientifically we're solving conundrums here. So all types can have their own special kind of loop, and that is like a circle within this bigger circle of the anxiety problem we were already talking about, just in general, when things are working harmoniously. So there's a lot of stress and tension built into these functions, or that accompany it. Okay, so going back to it's very easy to think that these functions cause problems then, so like let's not use them or get rid of them or replace them. They're all required, and for the individual where their position is actually essential. So don't be envious that someone has perhaps a certain function in a higher position than you do. It's there for a reason. Likewise, yours is there for a reason. So these functions are not negotiable. You can't. It's not about trying to cut corners and get the easy way out of this. It's about acknowledgement, acceptance, and taking on the responsibility and maintenance. I should have put a disclaimer. If you're not interested in any of this, you better not watch it, because once you now got the burden of responsibility being placed upon you. So Carl is here, Eric Zombro is here. Anyone I missed a shout out to? If I have, I apologize, but you're welcome and thank you for being here. So, and not just pros and cons with each of these functions, but they've got limitations, and that's another reason why they work hard, like as a team, to sort of watch each other's back. There are blind spots, and by having all these functions spread out, it helps to cover all bases. Even then, there are still blind spots. And as Freebird was talking about with the development, your functions are only going to be as useful as far as how well developed they are. You can see how, for example, with the INFJ, if actually, funny enough, the INFJ and the INTJ both have SE in their fourth inferior function. They both can't really handle over stimuli, loud sounds, bright lights, city environments, and they'll both prefer, they'll get drained by it. And social gatherings and things like that. People are too much after a while. Parties, and they'll both prefer to recharge in quiet, natural, like more sort of stable environments. But you can see that it's because the SC is a little bit underdeveloped. So if you wanted to improve your SC, you would put yourselves into those sort of situations to try and build up a bit of stamina and endurance and tolerance. And you might not like it, but at least you're not going to have panic attacks when a surprise happens, because you won't be so afraid of chaos. It's kind of like, you're a control freak. Well, to develop yourself, you're going to have to allow yourself a little bit of randomness, a bit of spontaneity, a little bit of chaos into your life, and not be so knee-jerk repulsed by it, put off, or you want to run from it because it's just too like surprise, motherfucker. It's like, gosh, shit, give me a heart attack. It's like, well, that's why you need to develop your SE so that you don't get a heart attack when I jump out and prank you. And by the by, so forget any solution of having a lobotomy. That's not going to really answer anything. That'll make it worse. There's no escaping this. You got these functions. You're going to have to, if you're falling short and they're problematic, you're going to have to address these issues. Okay, so let's go back towards, because really this is all leading up to like why the INFJ in particular has chronic sadness, why they're depressed, why they are misery guts, why they seem to enjoy misery. It's kind of like it's baked into them. So FE, second position, auxiliary function. How does it operate then? So now, without any on its own, without any other functions factoring in here, FE is kind of hyper vigilant. It's very attentive. It cares. The needs of others are more important than their own. So it is caring, it is nurturing, it does want harmony. These are all wonderful and good things, yes. But hyper vigilant and attentive, automatically concerned, automatically worried, even when they don't need to be, and in a state of readiness as well. Captain with a cape, ready to save the day kind of thing, because who knows when the tribe might need you. So you can see it has its pros, and those are some of the downsides of it. So they're worry warts, and being in the parent slot, it's higher than TI, so it has more authority. So when TI says, like, hey, this is a bad idea, FE comes along and says, don't worry about it. Like, we're going to still help the tribe, even if you don't like it. And so for the INFJ, what might end up happening is they'll go along with what the tribe wants, whilst carrying doubt that this might not be a good idea, and they'll be uncomfortable with the situation. So that's because FE ranking at number 2 has more authority than TI. And this sort of this conflict of this, this split is a nice setup for a bit of cognitive dissonance right away. You can see how you're in two minds. Like, I want to help the tribe, make them happy, but it's not making me happy. I feel actually a bit uncomfortable with the situation, and now I'm betraying myself in order to please the tribe. And if I don't please the tribe, then I feel like I'm betraying them. So what am I supposed to do? So lots of dilemmas end up happening. Mini wars within this bigger war. Right. Now, if, for example, FE has reached out to the tribe and for whatever reason is shot down, like we don't want your opinion, we don't want to tell you, no, we reject you. Like if FE gets its feelings hurt, then its shadow function jumps in. So from FE now comes FI from the shadows. This is the critical parent slot. And that's why this is so devastating for the INFJ, because in that everyone's got a critical parent slot, but for the INFJ, that is occupied by introverted feeling. That causes mayhem. For the INTJ, that critical parent slot will be occupied by TI instead. So this FI that now butts in, hearing that the FE has been shot down and rejected, is not wanted, not welcomed, or whatever, is what makes the INFJ feel like an utter failure. You're useless. No one likes you. I don't even know why you bother trying to help people. You're pathetic, kind of thing. And you deserve to be on your own. You're lonely. Good. And if you believe in hearing that, it discourages the INFJ from bothering to try again. What's the point of me trying to reach out to people for help? I've just told myself I'm a complete loser and no one likes me. I hate myself, The INTJ equivalent with TI in the critical parent slot will be something along the lines of your reasons are crap. So don't bother tell anyone your plans. Don't bother tell anyone your thoughts. Keep them to yourself. They're stupid thoughts anyway, So there's still condescending going on, but instead of hurting the value system, it's hurting the reason system. And the same kind of thing, that if the INTJ starts to listen and believe the critical parent TI, then it might conclude, well, what's the point of me bothering to try new projects out? Why should I bother get a new job because I'm useless and all this sort of stuff? There are other people with qualifications who can do the job better or whatever, or they don't want my opinion, so I won't bother share it then. And then the TI is like, you're an idiot for thinking that they even wanted to hear your opinion. And this is because the TE isn't getting the feedback, or it's been rejected, or it's shot down, or inaccessible is another way of putting it. So that's the shadow side causing a bit of havoc. And then you've got that inferior SE again, the little baby of the group, who comes along and sort of with its hypersensitivity of the chaos around, sort of utters a little, mouse voice. Hey everyone, it's raining outside or something, or the car's out of gas, or here's some real world reality checks, like, oh, don't forget to feed the fish or whatever. And all the other functions turn around because they're higher up the stack, and tell it to, like, don't remind us of the chaos that we're trying to keep controlled and keep in check. So it kind of like unintentionally, it's trying to be helpful, but unintentionally it's rubbing salt into the wounds. So going back to like this James of House of Bonn, Emmanuel. Yes, good to see you, sir. Oh, welcome over. I don't see you over here that often. Carl, did I say hi to you? Good to see you here as well. Do you have a wrench? If not, I'll give you one after the show. Same with you, Emmanuel. So without any of these development going on, if everything is just like, you're completely oblivious to all of this, there's nothing really coordinating, you're going on kind of natural instinct, then by default for the INFJ, they are riddled with being anxious, and it will be a bit kind of it'll be like, I don't know why I'm anxious. It's because, well, in your sort of subconscious, without you being aware, it's because you're trying to predict the future, you're trying to control chaos, keep that at bay. You're putting the needs of other people. You feel responsible for the welfare of other people more than your own. It's no wonder you feel anxious. It's but they can't pin it because they don't have the information. So the INFJ will feel anxious, they'll feel under stress because of the hypervigilance and the hypersensitivity, and because of the chaos, they'll be concerned and worried. They come with a good heart, they mean well, but they'll be very subservient, sacrificing, a martyr, and the feelings of the tribe is their responsibility, and this makes them very vulnerable as a result. So it's very common for narcissists to prey on an INFJ because of their willingness to help other people, and the sacrificial sort of aspect of it, and a low sense of self-worth. They're not going to defend themselves. They've already got an inner critic going on. So easy targets for a narcissist to exploit and abuse them. Right. Do we have... Let's see. I can't see the full window because I've moved things around. Hold on, let me adjust my layout. There. Have I missed any questions? Oh, oops. Someone hasn't heard of it before. Is this particularly common amongst MGTOWs? Apparently so. A lot of people call themselves INFJs, but I suspect they are either mistyping or they read the brochure and they were sold on the idea, because as we're unpacking this, it's not something it can be with development, with effort, time and commitment and all this sort of stuff, yes. But if you're underdeveloped, oblivious to it, and you're going around calling yourself an INFJ, you're in a world of hurt, and I mean that like unimaginable pain. And I suspect, I've got a bit here later on, but as a sort of spoiler, I suspect a lot of it's meant to be one of the rare ones, and that might be another reason why people are sort of like, oh, that's me, I'm a unicorn. Like, you're not a unicorn. You're kind of effed up, yo. You're very, without the right attentive care and nurturing and management, you're a mess and unhealthy and dangerous to yourself and those around you. That goes with all personality types, but for the INFJ, it's a particular kettle of fish or whatever. It's a pretty devastating eruption. Sometimes they call it going supernova. Yeah. So just be a bit careful, Carl. It's like this might be a bit of a Pandora's box for you. Okay. And because it's rare, I'm wondering if maybe one of the reasons why it's rare is because without any intervention or help, then this could easily become an issue of suicide. Any other sort of, I'm just quickly scanning if there's any particular comments, or as an INTJ, I can say Billy is on the money. Okay, great. So this would be helpful for you. The INTJ and the INFJ are very similar, and the differences are complementary. So very easy to understand. If you understand one, it's a lot. It's kind of it's not too much of a stretch of the brain cells to understand the other one. And where they are similar, basically with their first and fourth, but they're both introverted intuition at number one. So despite the INTJ appearing to be very logical, that's what's on show and on display for everyone to see, really they are operating under the head honcho of their introverted intuition, just like the INFJ. And they both have extroverted sensing in their fourth position. So where they differ is the middle two and three. Yeah, I mean, don't really worry about the rarity or the percentages. That will kind of distort that will create a kind of bias when it comes to wanting to type yourself, because everyone wants to be a unicorn. It's just, I mean, I think 75% are sensory people. At some point, your curiosity will make you start to think, well, what kind of personality type does all these mentally disordered people have then? Or what kind of personalities you'll start, if you really got into it, you'll start to typecast your parents and your friends and your family and everyone you meet. You'd be like, who's this person? And you really, if you're doing it in a sort of kind of hobby sort of way, okay, fine, but don't be too serious about it unless you're planning to actually implement it in a serious way, because it is very confusing. Like, for example, for the INFJ, right? I've already described how they got self-hate, critical parent. They got self-doubt. They're kind of they don't really think of themselves at all. They put other people first. So then it shouldn't be a surprise that their sentiment is, I don't really know who I am. Now, if you don't know who you are, but you've just identified yourself as an INFJ, then that's a contradiction. So a true INFJ, even if they've done a personality test, will probably still have doubt, are they actually an INFJ? Because they would probably don't want to be one. It sounds like a headache. And that's the thing, because people will turn around and be like, I took a personality test. And it's like, yeah, but there's a bias towards it, because that's not the scientific approach to doing it. So you gotta take all this with a bit of a pinch of salt when it comes to typing yourself. Wow, rarer than hen's teeth, apparently. I don't know, these days it seem to be everywhere. It's like megalodon shark teeth, they're everywhere. Well, wasn't that? Anyway, getting sidetracked. So, where are we? Oh, notes. So we see that there's a kind of override, like a background of sadness for the INFJ, loneliness, no one understands me, whatever. And why doesn't anyone understand you? Because you don't even understand yourself. I mean, it sounds a bit cliched. The depression along with it. And with that self-hate, if they were to be aware of their functions, they'll probably start going on along in life like this. They'll probably start to see themselves as being the issue here, instead of their function stack, or how they're using their function stack. So if you want to be a more healthier type of iron, this will go for all types, but in this case study here of the INFJ, the critical parent needs developing. and it's located in the shadow. It's the ego syntonic, so it's not very easily accessible. But you'll be surprised how often it does poke its head out, for example, in just daily occurrences without you even realizing it. Things like self-doubt, feeling shame. Where's your shame coming from? It's how you feel inwardly, introvertedly. Your shame, if you feel shame or guilt, that is a FI speaking to you. Now, how much authority or sway it has varies depending on where it's located in the stack. But for the INFJ in the critical parent slot, this sense of guilt is and shame and another kind of negative criticizing comments is sort of like doubled up. It's magnified. It's very, very judgmental, very scornful. So it's very brutal. So where everyone is able to feel guilt and shame, for the INFJ with FI in the critical parent slot, they feel super shame. They feel super guilt. They feel like a super failure. So how do you? So if you're trying to improve and become a healthier type of person, how do you address the FI then? It means you need to stop using your intuition and trying to jump into the future, and you need to be in the present in the company of your FI. And you've got to kind of get it into a little bit of a headlock here, because FI will try and tell you, will try and keep you from the present to a little degree. It will remind you of your past. That's depression. And it will remind you of your future. Say, if you try and do whatever, you're going to F that up as well. And your future is anxiety, things that are yet to be. And then it will slap you around the face in the present at the same time. And say, and all of this means you're a piece of shit. And that's why you should be ashamed and feel guilty for the things you do. And if you're now trying to be friends with the FI shadow, being ego dystonic, it's not going to feel right. It's not going to feel normal. This isn't something you do naturally. Now, to make this, if you were listening to the stream about the good wolf and the bad wolf, what is really happening here is not that you've got this critical parent, this evil villain who enjoys seeing you suffer. It's actually just like the other functions. It's actually trying to help you. It just has no softness to it. So it's basically just telling you brutal things. When it says like you're a piece of shit, it doesn't literally mean like and so no one should like you. It means you need to think better about yourself. You've been sacrificing and you've allowed people to walk all over you, and you're a piece of shit because of that. So it is actually trying to help you. It's not very softy soft with its words. So you've got to kind of like translate it a little bit. And that's the funny. Afterwards, you'll be able to laugh about it. But that's the sort of funny thing. It's the brutal hard truth that the FI is telling you. It slaps you with compassion, in its own way. And when it says like, you deserve to feel guilt, it's not literally trying to make you feel guilt. It's saying that there's a problem here, and the message is like, again, like to think better of yourself and to not allow whatever it is that causes you to feel guilt. So it's almost like it says, see, you feel guilt, prove the point. We wouldn't be feeling guilt if you took better care of yourself. So you're an idiot and a dummy for not doing that. Yeah. It'll still like say it in a kind of condescending sort of tone. Anyway, so with all this going on, do you feel tired listening to this stream? Well, that's how the INFJ probably feels, emotionally and psychologically drained. And in an attempt to reduce the intensity, they can start to like shut down emotionally, they become so withdrawn. And this is a precarious situation if you see something like this taking place, a change in demeanor of the so-called INFJ, or a friend or whatever. You see that they become withdrawn. What does this mean? Is that they're struggling and they're overwhelmed, and they're becoming they might seem calm, they might seem collected, they might seem somewhat of a neutral expression, but you'll notice that they're not happy or sad. They've become numb to the situation, and this is them trying to cope by avoiding it. They don't know how to deal with these functions. They're all out of whack and chaotic, so they just turn into a vegetable. Now, this might not make them, air quotes, happy, but to them, at least, they're not feeling sad, and that's kind of like a victory. It's a stupid victory, but it's like, look, I can't really be happy. It's very difficult, and I'm constantly bombarded with feelings of guilt, shame, doubt, and self-hatred and all this sort of stuff, and I'm depressed and anxious all the time, and stressed out and overwhelmed and exhausted. And if I can just shut that off, well, that's as good as it's going to get. But by doing this, by turning into a vegetable like this, then it's kind of like a psychological suicide. They're not experiencing life anymore. And despite trying to force this as a way of being, like being content with this outcome, verdict, they can't escape the lack of fulfillment creeping in. Wishing, I wish I could be happy. I wish I could get control of my emotions. I wish I could control my thoughts. I wish I understood better, So that desire is still there, and they can't really sever that away. So it's kind of like the skeleton in the closet scenario, and they can hear the skeleton sort of knocking on the door. But what are they to, if they're not getting any feedback from other people, or people are trying to help but it doesn't sort of resonate because they're unaware of what's going on, and what kind of medication, as it were, is required, then there's nothing there's no intervention that's going to break this for the INFJ. Again, don't forget, this kind of scenario will happen with all the types, but the INFJ with this unique configuration is the sort of extreme version of what can take place. They're extreme in each type anyway, but this one is one of the soul, the spirit of the heart, and it's very upsetting for not just for the INFJ, but for those around watching their INFJ friend or partner or whoever, family member, implode and get torn apart and in deep trouble. So yeah, with this desire that they tried to deny is not there, of wanting things to be better, they know as well that shutting down like this isn't really how one should live their life. Hey, Shinobi-1, good to see you here. And this is another little circle of dilemma where it's like, how can you open the door for happiness without also opening the door for sadness? So they cut off the option of being happy in order to try and keep the sadness away. Okay, we're getting towards the end of this these notes and this stream. I know there's a lot to take on here, so I appreciate your following, and if this is like a revelation for you or something like that, there is additional. These are the footnotes. You want to really go deep dive. Oh boy, stay tuned, I suppose, because in the next stream we'll go into how it kind of plays out. This is the sort of theoretical side of the conversation, of the topic. But yeah, so we'll conclude with this sort of maybe optimistic spin on things. Well, we'll lead into it. So if the FE, even though it might not be activated, but if a opportunity arises, it sees a path to a bridge of connection, then the FI is going to, FE is going to jump at it, but the FI will utilize that connection, and it will also jump, which is partly why the INFJ can seem to rush into things and will overshare, talk in excess. Sound familiar? Who talks in excess? I don't know. And because why would it do this? Because it's a rare opportunity for them to allow themselves permission to have a little bit of self-value for a change, without the FI criticizing them, and they want to share their human needs. That's like a separate thing, like the human needs, and how they truly deeply feel, because all that kind of stuff has been locked away in the shadow. So when an opportunity comes along, they overshare. They're probably very energized and ecstatic, kind of hyperactive, and head over heels. But yeah, it's an opportunity for them to feel like they're being seen as a real person, not this servant, people pleaser, but actually for an actualized person, for who they really are, and to feel like they actually exist, that they do matter. So this is it's kind of, it is a bit overwhelming for the recipient, but it's a good sign. And it's kind of sad. It's like the INFJ shouldn't have to wait for opportunities like that to be able to express themselves freely without fear of ridicule, criticism, rejection, and things like that. Imagine being in a desert and there's no water, no food. Suddenly now it's like, oh, there's a puddle of piss and a shit burger. They're gonna take it, and they're gonna scoff it down, immediately. They're not gonna hesitate. So and because of this, this opportunity for them to feel seen and as a real person, things like that. That's why when it comes to things like love, loyalty, companionship, the sort of the softer, positive sides of the emotions, that's very sacred. As a real treasure for them. And it's a treasure really for the recipient as well, because it's not often they'll be in the presence of this taking place, because the INFJ doesn't have the opportunity to do this often. But in those sort of moments, in a pleasing way, what is happening is it's bypassing the stresses of the other functions, and it is bringing a peace to the internal world of the INFJ. And that's why it's so sacred, and they value it, and they're so grateful and happy, genuinely happy. They might even cry about it, because of the relief and the acceptance, and to not be needed, but to actually be wanted. To not feel like I'm just being used, but actually I'm being accepted for who I am as an actual person, even though I might not know who that is. So they are not being judgmental, they're not criticizing, and that's a huge, it means a lot to the INFJ. And this brings a reassurance and a peace. Peace is probably one of the big things. Like when you say to someone, like, what is it you want in life? For the INFJ, peace is probably like maybe number one, or maybe love is number one, but peace is sort of up there with it. Now the thing is, the FI will still come along. It likes to have its word, the criticizing, nagging parent, and be like, "You see, you dummy. You see, you dummy. You can be happy. People do like you. And so the strong kind of personality character trait of this type of individual is really their reflection of the internal war they're having within themselves, because that's where most of their time is being spent, just trying to keep control of this mayhem inside them. And it's because of these challenges, difficulties, that make the INFJ achieve great things. And this is the brochure parts that people probably fall in love with, because they think, oh, they're so mystical and powerful and stuff like that. Well, it's because of these challenges, and it can steer them towards careers of like teachers, counselors, and that sort of profession. Yeah. Now, just because what we're discussing here might be relatable, still, again, it's not a confirmation. So don't take this as a way of diagnosing or typing yourself as an INFJ and be like, oh, I experience loneliness. Well, everyone experiences loneliness. Oh, I experience depression. Everyone experience. These aren't like isolated terms for the INFJ. Now, if you do know if you are an INFJ, or if you know someone who's an INFJ, or there's an INFJ in your life, kind of thing, appreciate them. That helps them out tremendously. Show them that you appreciate them. Be blunt about it. Like, say it like that if you need to. Because the thing is, they can't help, because of the way the functions are. They can't help, even though they know logically that they're not really responsible for the people's well-being. They can't help but feel that they are, because of FE. So they can't help feeling responsible for carrying the weight of the world, of the external world. They feel it's their obligation. Who else is going to do it? The INFJ steps up and says, I will. And really, come on now, is it really their responsibility? No, it's the tribe's responsibility. It's their burden, really. The tribe needs to look after the tribe's well-being. Now, there is a section of intrigue where it's kind of like for the INFJ to feel needed, they sort of insert themselves and take the responsibility away from the tribe to look after themselves and say, hey, don't you guys worry, I'll do that for you. So Captain Saver, whatever, Saver tribe, kind of creates the situation that he finds himself in. So there is that sort of element to all of this. Even more because why? Because they don't want to be because they can't be responsible for themselves, so they have to try and be responsible for the other people. And how are they going to be responsible for the other people unless they need them? So they create a need for them to be needed. So as altruistic as they may seem, there is actually a transaction and an exchange taking place. They're not doing it for no reason. The reason is because they need the feedback so that they can put it in sync with the other functions. But it's also a bit of validation, a bit of esteem, and so on, a bit of identity and things like that. It adds to it. It's not the primary source, but it all goes towards it. Anyway, so if you do have a INFJ in your life, or you know one or whatever, and you bear this in mind, that they need a bit of gratitude, a bit of appreciation. Yeah, they might be a bit of a dummy for doing the things that they do, but they're kind of doing it out of a good place. They're not really being malicious. And the thing is, you might see them they might be a bit whiny sometimes, or maybe childish, because they've got a child spirit in them. They might seem a bit discombobulated. They might seem a bit mad or erratic. And that's a sign that they're basically struggling, and they need help to calibrate these functions. It's not the system they've got is failing them. This is in part what the shadow is there for when the ego is not adequate enough to take care of day-to-day running, or is it getting out of order or whatever, then the dark side, I can't believe I just said dark side, the shadow, the ego syntonic says, oi, you're being a bit too much. JR's here. He's late again. Oh, God. Gotta be on time. Did you bring a notepad? Right. But welcome to being here, JR. Good to see you. And during these struggling times, they're falling apart. They are actually at risk of imploding, which might be why they're rare, because maybe many of them didn't get the help they needed and felt that the only way out is to self-delete, is to kill themselves. And even though we try and tell ourselves that, look, F everyone else, doesn't matter if they accept you or not, things like that, fuck their opinions or whatever. Yes, it's true, but they still have, for the INFJ at least, still has FE in a second position. So they still need acceptance, unfortunately. They might say to themselves that I don't care about, they try to say to themselves that they don't care about other people's opinions, but they need it. They need the feedback, because how can they utilize intuition and TI if they don't have the FE, if they don't have feedback from people? They're in the NITI loop of analysis paralysis, coupled with a bit of FI condescension, telling them that they're a piece of shit, and they go, yeah, logically I know, but what's the point then? And then the NI says, well, that's going to be the future, so they need people who appreciate and not exploit their vulnerabilities, and in return, they are some of the most caring, loyal, whatever nice sort of things you want to find being said about them. So that's the theoretical side. We haven't even really discussed sadness as a topic, the anxiety and all this. Anger will also be included in this conversation going forward. Addiction, identity. I'm just quickly looking at some of the titles and how it all plays out and the run-ins of things, and then some further things to help those who are in this sort of situation. That was pretty intense. I don't know. And I think at some point I'll probably have to do a crash course stream on the MBTI. So there's another sort of theoretical how it's structured and what's all this duality sort of sides and how they balance and positions and how they play, how they each it gets a bit too much for one stream anyway. Ambiverts, okay. In the future stream. Well, that's the thing. So you might have noticed that sometimes I'll be saying introverted intuition and extroverted feeling. One is introverted, one is extroverted. So really, every single one of you, as part of your function stack, will have half of it as introverted. The other half will be extroverted. You are both. Which is the one that's at the top tends to be, not always, but tends to be it's kind of like which foot do you lead with. So if you've got an introverted intuition in position 1, then for the most part you're kind of considered to be an introvert. But as you see, as we're describing, look how much emphasis is placed on the second function, extroverted feeling, right? So they go kind of hand in hand. They complement each other. You need both. You can't just be living in your head in introversion land. You'll die. And likewise, you can't just live in extroverted world and never do any introversion, because then you've got no sense of self or purpose. It's all about the tribe. So you do need both. You're not really a full blood through and through introvert. Likewise, same with the extrovert. And that's at least in the context of the understanding with Myers-Briggs, with the MBTI. That's how they look at it. Half your functions are introverted, half of them are extroverted. And it's always like, if you got introverted, the next function will automatically be extroverted. And then one afterwards will be introverted, extroverted, introverted, extroverted. You don't get two introverted functions right next to each other. You don't ever get two extroverted functions right next to each other. And there's a reason for that, because if you look at it as like a coin, you've got a heads and tails. You don't have two heads on one coin. One side is a head, say that's introverted, doesn't really matter, but say that's, and the other side is going to be, well, you already know, because it's the first one, so it's going to be extroverted, obviously. And that's how the shadow stack is formulated. So if you've got introverted feeling or whatever, sensing, intuition, whatever it is, in the shadow, in the flip side, it's going to be the introverted. So there you go. Those are quick ways of understanding how they derive this structure and why it is. Because on the surface, when you look at it at a glance, you're like, it seems a bit like random. It's like just how they, I'll just plop it in there because of kicks and giggles. It's like, no, there's actually there's theory behind it. It's not just there for the sake of being there, Likewise, like with the feeling and thinking, is like if your feeling is second, then let's say it's let's use the INFJ. So second is extroverted feeling in position 2. You already automatically know what function is going to be in position 3 as a result. That will be, so what's the opposite of extroverted feeling? It'll be introverted. What's the opposite of feeling? It's going to be thinking. So the third one is introverted thinking. So that's how you deduce each of the functions. Is if you know one, you can start to like work out what the other ones are. If you know the first one is introverted intuition, well, what's the opposite of introverted intuition? It's going to be opposite of introversion will be extroversion, and opposite of intuition, sorry, will be sensing. So the opposite function to introverted intuition is extroverted sensing. And where their position is number 1 and number 4. So if you know number 1 is introverted intuition, automatically you should know that in number 4 is extroverted sensing. There you are. That's deciphering the code. Any other quick questions? Oh, thank you kindly, and thank you for the suggestions with the ideas. I've jotted them down. I'm going to see which ones are feasible. And you could say reaching out like that, asking for the tribe opinion is TE. Sorry, TE. Give me some reasons why me and the kids should do things, and you guys have given me reasons. And if I was asking more for sort of value, like why should I, like values, like because it's fun, or because she's never done it before, or because it'd be good for, that would be more of a kind of FE type of response. So cool. Right. Did anyone solve the maze? Anyway, thank you. We'll be carrying on with this. Make sure you bring your notepads, and hopefully it helped. And I'll see you all again soon. All right. Adios.